The 3 Down Greencast is brought to you by the Pile of Bones Brewing Company. New taproom now open at Sass Drive and Cameron in Regina. Welcome to the 3 Down Greencast. Joel Gasson with you here today, and you will hear a different voice with me today as, John Fraser, I think he's just too excited that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers won the Banjo Bowl in convincing fashion. Of course, we're going to talk about that. So he couldn't be here. He actually couldn't be here for work reasons, or so he claims. You never really know with John from time to time. He's apparently in Calgary on training, so I've been told. So instead, with me today is CBC Saskatchewan, and if I try to list off every other place he's ever worked for, we'd probably run out of time.
And you make me sound so old.
No, just with a lot of small stops along the way. Good friend of the show, CBC Saskatchewan's Dan Plaster, and yes, we hate your team.
Oh, I hate everybody's team. Shout out to Stephen Godfrey and Podcast Ain't Play Nobody, and of course, our favorite, the only college football podcast, the Shutdown Fullcast.
Yeah, so if you don't know, and you probably don't if you're listening to us right now, I just made 2 college football podcast references off the top of this episode. I did rip off the Shutdown Fullcast opening a couple of weeks ago. So I think what I actually did was speak into the existence of Dan Plaster on this program in a roundabout sort of way, because like the Shutdown Fullcast, we don't make jokes on this program. We just talk them into existence.
Yes, and everything's canon.
Yeah. So yeah, Dan stepping in this week from the palatial CBC Saskatchewan studios, and that's why there is an increased value in the audio coming out of the other end. This thing out of the my co-host this time for a change. So you might be able to understand a little more clearly what's being said by my co-host. There'll also be a lot more better information and fewer hot takes that prove to be considerably wrong, because that's kind of John's thing on this podcast, is he comes up with something stupid and he ends up being wrong. So.
And if you have any complaints, just tweet at jdunk12 and and all will be fine.
Yeah, and it's going to be fun. We're hopefully going to meet up with the Dunkster this week. He's going to be in town for the Canada West Game of the Week, Rams Huskies. That's the Rams' only appearance on the Canada West Game of the Week this year. So it's Dunk's only trip to Regina in that capacity this year. So hoping to meet up with him at some point while he's here later in the week. But of course, we got a lot to talk about on this podcast. And for some reason, it always seems John misses the ones where like really significant stuff happens. Like I remember last year, I remember last year I did a couple of times with Ariel Zer when she was CJME before she left for the Riders, and it was the week after they got dismantled by Montreal, and then there was the week, or I guess it was a couple of years ago, and then he missed later when Jerron Carter got cut. So every time something really significant happens that we really want to talk about, he tends to disappear.
So if you check his schedule next year, and when you see it in the future, you know something's going to happen. And just blame John.
It's usually after the fact, though. I don't usually find out until after the fact.
Okay.
He's probably known about this train for a while. He just forgotten to tell me. But that's okay. It's pretty easy to find pinch hitters around here. There's a lot of people in Saskatchewan, luckily, that like to talk football. And we will talk football, I promise, at some point during this expedition.
Yes, Canadian football. We will not talk about USC actually being 2-0.
No.
Or
the most important team in college football, of course, the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors, who are also 2-0.
Yes, big win over Oregon State.
Mm-hmm. I actually stayed up late and watched that game on Facebook. It ended at like 1:45 here in Saskatchewan.
How was the quality of that? Was it good?
It was actually pretty good. Like the picture quality was good. The broadcast was understandably pretty homerish and not great in terms of like announcing, but no, it was pretty easy to watch. The streaming quality was like you were watching TV, because I have like the Facebook Watch app on my television, so I was able to make that transition pretty easy. So yeah, it looked good. I think it was like, I remember seeing on the Hawaii Twitter account that the game was on pay-per-view in Hawaii, so maybe it was just an actual TV broadcast that was put on Facebook, so maybe that's why it was so good.
Yeah, but the thing is, that game was still over before the Cal-Washington game was over.
Yeah, because that game took forever with all the delays.
Yeah, and just think about it, like, what was it, a 2.5 hour delay? And this speaks to the CFL fans' heart. They just kept playing.
They did.
They there might have been 3,000 people in Husky Stadium in Seattle, and that game ended 2:45 our time.
But I also think that one never got started before the delay, right?
No,
so it was delayed. That is a difference as well, right? So if one team was up in the third quarter, they might have just called it.
Yeah. Well, no, because BYU Utah 2 weeks ago was delayed for about an hour. They've had a lot of delays in college football. Yeah, BYU Utah, the Holy War 2 weeks ago was delayed for a bit too. But I know people don't care about that, so I will stop.
No, next we'll just get into TV ratings, which I know people care even less about. So I don't know. There's some weird thing going on between like Fox and NBC right now about who actually had the most watched game of the week or something in the NFL. I'm like, guys, no one cares.
If the ratings are great, just roll with it.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to get into a little bit. We're going to talk about the debacle that was the Banjo Bowl. Jesus. The Banjo Bowl for the Riders and what that loss means and how they lost, what they do next against Ottawa. We're going to talk a little bit about the return of Jordan Williams-Lambert and kind of how he fits and where they go there. And because we are a couple of broadcast nerds, we're going to talk about this reported new 6-year extension for the CFL on TSN. Usually before we get into all that, John and I discuss beer and what we're drinking. Dan, I know you don't. I told you this is why I provide the beer, usually when I am with a guest host.
I know, and my mild palate, you would probably give me something. You would probably torture me because I have the wussiest palate. I like swill, and I know you've been trying to give me some advice on just you're inching me forward towards the more flavorful beer, and I'm glad you didn't call me out on this.
Yeah,
it would have been bad.
Well, normally, actually, when people agree to come on this program, I don't torture them with beer I know they're not going to like. So I wouldn't have brought you like the sourest thing I could find. I would have spared you from that. I do have some. I do have some options in my fridge. I think you would have liked. For me, in honor of Winnipeg's win, I have cracked a can of Torque Brewing. They're out of Winnipeg. Just their straight blonde ale. Just a nice, easy drinking beer that I think you would probably enjoy even.
It would probably taste like 3 more.
Yeah. Kind of like how the Bombers had at least 3 more touchdowns in them in that that Banjo Bowl that I think Saskatchewan is trying to forget. And what really sticks out to me in this game isn't so much the fact that the Riders lost, because if you just look at like the big picture and the fact they had won 6 games in a row, common sense and mathematics suggest they're going to lose another game at some point. They're going to lose another few games at some point this season before it all is said and done. So the fact that they lost, to me, isn't really that concerning. It's just that they lost in such a way that was so preventable, because we've seen these issues for weeks with the poor tackling, the lack of discipline and defense, especially on the secondary, and it stockpiled, and it got extremely worse in Winnipeg, and maybe they just needed that ass whipping to make sure that they can actually get these issues sorted out, because sometimes it's a little easier to get the players' attention after a loss than a win.
I think this started in the second half of the Labor Day game, because that is when that Rider defense started to get pushed around by the Bomber offensive line. They were able to really move the football in the second half, they being pronouns, pal, they being the Bombers. Mm-hmm. And then it just seemed to roll, and you kind of got a sense right when Chris Streveler had that second and long 17-yard draw play from inside the 5-yard line to get the first down in the first drive. You're just going to go. I think every Rider fan and every CFL fan knew right then that game was going to go the way it was. And I don't think that freight train was going to be stopped right from that play on.
Yeah, it's remarkable how much the entire game really changed on that one play, because the Bombers won the coin toss and then elected to receive the ball, which I thought was curious, because generally, I mean, you and I both agree we like to take the ball off the start of the game, but there are circumstances where I'm okay with deferring, especially when I'm a guy that likes to put my best unit on the field first, and in Winnipeg right now, that's clearly their defense. So I thought they would have wanted to set the tone with their defense. Instead, they put Chris Streveler in the offense out there, and we're like, okay, this could get ugly, and then the first play of the game is a sack that brings them all the way back, and all of a sudden they're in the shadow of their own goalpost, and you're like, oh boy, if they, there was a potential safety there. They had Streveler like scrambling around the end zone a little bit, and then he's gone, and you're like, oh boy, here we go.
That was a well-designed draw play, though. I think
It was, yeah.
from then on, it just felt like Paul LaPolice got in that play calling groove. And it's funny when a guy, especially like Paul LaPolice, when he gets in that play calling groove, it is so hard to knock him off that. But then on the flip side, when he can't get into the groove, oh man, they're miserable. Like he is almost a feast or famine type of guy when it comes to play calling. And he just got on that roll and he just saw what worked. And what worked was just using that giant offensive line, and they literally pushed around the Rider defense. And I don't know, like, you watch Chris Streveler, I don't know if he has a clue. It's just like one read, run, one read, run. And even that one read looks like dead straight panic, but it worked. And it works for him. And then when he does throw the ball, it is a funky motion. It's long. It's not your prototypical Mike Riley, Bo Levi Mitchell. Even Cody Fajardo has a great, like, he looks like a prototypical thrower when he just steps into a throw. But it's nightmarish. But yet somehow he's one of those guys, he finds a way to win. And I don't know how he does it. And it's ugly, but for some reason it works.
Is it safe to say that this is maybe like a perfect storm against the Riders, just because the fact that I think if you've been watching the defense for the most part all year, teams have been able to have relative success running the football against them. And then all of a sudden, okay, without Andrew Harris, and I brought this up last week with John, I'm like, if Andrew Harris is in that game, he's getting about the ball half the time, so you can plan for that. Right now, without him in the lineup, okay, Chris Streveler could run it the week before, and obviously not so much in the Banjo Bowl, but in the Labor Day Classic, it's like, is Streveler going to run? Is Nick Dembski going to run? Is Lucky Whitehead going to run? Is Johnny Augustine going to run? I don't have a damn clue who's going to get the football here. And so for like kind of a small sample size, you obviously couldn't stretch that out into like a Grey Cup championship, but to confuse a defense for a week or two when you don't really know who's going to get the football, maybe it sort of worked out in Winnipeg's advantage rather than, okay, here, take it, Andrew Harris. Take it, Andrew Harris. Take it, Andrew Harris. You know?
Do you think it's almost like playing a wishbone offense? I mean, you see Army and Navy, and it's fake to the fullback, fake to the running back, quarterback runs. It almost felt like that's what the Riders were playing, a weird wishbone offense that
with a little more finesse than what Army pulls it off with. But
they're not with no chop blocks, and there's not 10 guys in the box. A spread.
And Streveler can throw the ball compared to Army quarterbacks.
Yeah, that was that Michigan, but it was. And I think that would be the most worrisome part, and maybe that's why the Riders brought in Chad Jeter, because he was strong against the run last year. They brought him in for depth purposes because, I mean, rest up Micah Johnson and get him ready for that playoff run. And once Zach Evans comes back, maybe things get a little bit better. But, I mean, that was tough watching that. And it was all interior. Nothing was an outside run. It was just like between the tackles or between the two 9 gaps or between the two like wide gaps, and he just went right up the middle over and over and over again. And like I said, it started in Labor Day game in the second half, and you mentioned it too. Like we talked about it offline a lot, and it just kind of rolled over. But I think in the end, this might be a very, very good thing for the Riders.
No, I agree. I think sometimes when things are going well for a while and your deficiencies start to creep in a little bit and you don't take them that seriously when you're still winning football games, and every now and then you need a good ass whipping to make sure that you kind of get things back in order and get that sort of wake-up call from things that were kind of starting to slip a little bit. Now it's like, okay, no, we have to be on point from this point forward because otherwise that's going to happen again.
And stay disciplined. I think discipline's the first thing in everything, not just penalties. Because that has been a downfall in the last 2 games
and the penalty thing is it's one thing to take like football penalties if you're called for holding or you're called for a face mask or these sort of things that just happen during a football game. But just some of the boneheaded penalties, like how many times has Nick Marshall like suplexed a guy out of bounds this season? Right? Or like the horse collars or these things that aren't necessarily football plays that probably anger a coach more than just, okay, he was going for a tackle, it went up a little high and he got a face mask. Try not to do that, but at least it was somewhat of a football play. But we're not seeing so many of those types as we are just boneheaded decisions.
Like the fight in Labor Day,
exactly,
or
Or no, it's LJ McRae against Ottawa when he threw that punch and got himself ejected.
Yes, but and LJ McRae's been a stud this year. He's been a great. I think he's better than Nick Marshall is right now. The way they're playing, and it's not just discipline in penalties. It's also discipline in the way they went after Strevler. It just seemed like the lane contain and that sort of thing on defense. He just kind of got away out of their grasp. And tackling discipline.
Yes, absolutely.
You know what? Don't make the knockout shot. Just make the nice, firm, quality tackle. Don't make it glorious. Just get the tackle. And I know you and I have ragged on Solomon Elimimian a lot about being that. But you know what? One thing he will do is be a sure tackler. And if he gets his hands on somebody, that person will come down. But he can't roam the field from the 65, like from one sideline to the other sideline. No linebacker in the CFL can do that, but everybody else needs to kind of pitch in on this.
Yeah, and I think it was a catastrophe where everything went wrong at the wrong time for the Riders. I think some players who were above those sorts of things are getting caught in that too, because kind of like in baseball where hitting's contagious, it kind of feels like missed tackling is sort of contagious in football for whatever reason. And so this is something I don't know. And the issue now is, other than showing it in film and getting it in people's heads, you can't really practice tackling anymore. And that's not an excuse, because they were fine up until a couple of weeks ago. So it's not the lack of tackling in practice that's causing this, but without being able to practice tackling again, without a training camp, how do you go about correcting it?
This is going to be those stupid coaches cliches, and it's the heart and the want. Yeah. And I hate saying stupid stuff like that, because you and I have done this for so long, and you hear coaches about it's not the name on the back of the jersey and all that. We can say all those things, but when it comes down to it, it's just want. Do you want to make that tackle? Do you want to make the kill shot, or do you want to make that solid tackle? Do you want to keep calm and keep your discipline defensively, especially this week too? It's not going to change. The only thing that's going to change this week against Montreal is this guy's a better passer. Vernon Adams is an outstanding quarterback, and they got to be much more disciplined in everything defensively in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is going to be a good test to see if they can stop the run, because right now Stanback is playing on another level. He might be the best running back in the league right now. Mm-hmm. Is that a stretch? I don't think so.
And that great. And Montreal, for some reason, they just found their offensive line again, and that offense is real solid. It's going to be a great test for the Saskatchewan Roughrider defense, and it's going to be fun. Like, this game coming up Saturday night, after watching the debacle this past Saturday, this game Saturday night at Mosaic Stadium is going to be fun. This is the game that we wanted at Molson Stadium in Montreal, but they didn't get it because Vernon Adams was hurt, and we all know that. But this is the game that everybody wanted to see with an upstart team, and kudos to Kahari Jones, as we're drifting already off the topic here, but kudos to Kahari Jones and that Montreal Alouette team. That, especially offensively, they've been great.
Yeah, and it's not really a surprise that all of a sudden Montreal finds themselves a quarterback and they're starting to look like a competent football team again. Funny how that works, eh?
It's awesome. I think that's what, but no, I think especially in a football, there's only two provinces in this country that love, capital L, love football, and that's Saskatchewan and that's Quebec. And I know the CFL wants their big international this and that, and I know the big hairy audacious goal is to be the world's football. But you know what? You have this gigantic football market that wants to spend money on football in Quebec. And I think that might be the big jewel that you can start getting in the CFL, especially within home. But that's a completely other story. It's just going to be
add to that, Montreal's a front-running town, so if they can start winning again, the people will start coming back, which will start making them cool again, right?
As a Habs fan, you are correct.
Yeah, the Habs are the only team that's a little immune to that in Montreal.
They even slipped when they were bad, too.
Oh, yeah, they slip a little bit, but not as bad as the other teams in the city do.
Yeah, it's true.
Big news.
But then
No, go on.
I was going to say, let's get to the Rider offense that was just as bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult really to talk about the offense in that game that badly. Because, I mean, yeah, they were bad and they didn't look great, but, I mean, Winnipeg's defense deserves a lot of props for that, obviously, for how good that unit is, and Richie Hall, for his flaws that we saw late in that game, again, in the Labor Day Classic. he seemed to have learned from that, and he just kept the pedal to the metal the entire game. So that certainly deserves to be pointed out. But yeah, the offense wasn't great. And so you're more of an X's and O's guy than I am. I kind of look big picture and have some hot takes and do dumb stuff. The Riders didn't really use William Powell a lot over the last 2 games. Is Winnipeg doing anything to kind of take him out of the equation, do you think?
I think that was their whole plan. That whole plan was to stop William Powell, not just running the football, but also catching the football out of the backfield, because he's great at both. And I think that was their main goal, and let Cody Fajardo beat them. And in the Labor Day game, he did. He was able to scramble and find those extra yards, especially in that last drive. And he was a reason why they did win. But also, they just, anytime William Powell got the ball, it seemed like it was a run blitz. Every time in that Banjo Bowl, anytime William Powell got the ball, it was 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and it was just a mess of blue. And the way it looked was key one was stopping the Riders running back in William Powell, and just the running game overall, because it always seems like it's that one big running play that snaps the Riders out of their doldrums offensively. May it be Powell with a nice 15-yard run, or 3 or 4 15-yard runs and a big catch, or it's Marcus Thigpen ripping off a 70-yard run that gets them out of a huge hole. So it looked like key one for the Bombers was stopping the Rider run game, and then after that it was just gravy. And it set them up for 2nd and long, because there was a lot of 2nd and longs in that game for the Riders.
Yeah, there was. Unlike in the Labor Day Classic, where they had some missed opportunities early on offense, where they really could have put that game away and done to the Bombers what the Bombers did to them this past week. They just never really had a sniff all game, is really what it felt like. And you just never really got the sense that the offense was really going to get going, other than early on in the game. And I remember you and I were messaging about this, where the Bombers got out to the lead, and it seemed like, IGF was going nuts, and it seemed like everything was going to start to go in Winnipeg's way, and then the defense made a few plays, and it felt like stuff was going to calm down. And like the Riders had somehow weathered the storm, to use a bit of a hockeyism like they talk about sometimes. And it felt like they were going to get back to that game, and then it just never really materialized.
And that comes down to the defensive game plan for Richie Hall. What they saw in the Labor Day Classic, they knew they're going to see again, and they just loaded up. It was a lot of guys in the box, and they just made it a mess in that front, in that Rider offensive front. And it just even didn't seem like a quick screenplay or any of that sort of stuff worked. It was very well done and very disciplined by the Bomber defense. And I think they were even a little bit better in containing Cody Fajardo as well. Fajardo wasn't able to get outside the contain and pick up those long chunk gains that he is apt to do, especially in this first half of the season that he's played with the Riders. And they really stopped that as well. So it wasn't just keying on William Powell on the run, it was keying on Cody Fajardo on the run, and you keep him in the pocket to try to beat you that way.
So where do they go here from now offensively, I guess, is the question. Because is the book out on the Rider offense now? Because Calgary kind of did a bit of the same against them earlier in the year and destroyed them at home. And then you had this game, and there's a second half last week. So where does Stephen McAdoo go from here? Does he have the ability even really to adjust? Because this has kind of just been the game plan he's been rolling since he came to Saskatchewan.
And that's the thing. He has to stretch the field. And that's what it's. I know when the later stages of the season, I know they say this field gets smaller because the weather gets colder, and that's when you start relying on the running game and the short passing game. But I think as we get deeper into the season, it seems like even those long stretch plays are starting to disappear as well. And that's one of those things they really got to get back into. Cody Fajardo can make those plays.
He can, yeah. Zach Collaros could not make those plays, and that's why Fajardo's been a better fit for this offense than Zach Collaros has been.
100%, but they got to get the protection too, because Fajardo did not have the protection against Winnipeg. And I know John Bowman is 108 years old, but he's still going to be able to get after him. And he is a sage veteran. There's not many tricks that could trick him or that Alouette defensive front. And it's going to have to be a very, not necessarily patient, but take your shots. And I know you're going to get into the new addition or the new old addition to the Rider offense. It'll just give them another tool, not necessarily against Montreal this week, but into the future to stretch that offense.
Yeah, so we might as well get into that now, because I think we've said really all there is to say about the Banjo Bowl at this point. I think big picture, you look at the Riders in that game, the fact they lost didn't matter. what this game, and I said it in my piece on 3 Down Nation, is basically this game won't define the Riders' season. It's where they go from here is kind of what we're going to learn a lot about them. If they could, and I felt like the defense, and you and I have talked about this, can go either way right now with how undisciplined they are. Either they can correct it and they can be a good team again, or this thing could really go off the rails with some of the weird stuff that's been going on, including, we've talked about the tackling, the penalties, and there's Ed Gainey trash-talking a Bomber receiver just because Chris Drevler overthrew him, and there was whatever that was with Mike O'Shea at the end of the game. Like, all of this is like, it's teetering on an edge, and it feels like it could go either way right now.
And this is going to be the first real great sign of Craig Dickinson as a head coach. He has done a fantastic job. It's an easy race right now for Coach of the Year in the CFL, and that's between him and Kahari Jones. That is a hands down. That's your East-West representatives for the Coach of the Year award.
Do you think coordinator could win it?
Oh,
and I know they're going to get Andrew Harris back for the rest of the year, but I mean, the work Paul LaPolice has done without his best 2 weapons is pretty remarkable.
Against a very good Rider defense. Incredible.
And so at the very least, is he hands down the best offensive coordinator in the league right now?
Yep, because he's willing to adapt and try new things. I mean, and we've talked about that before. What was the last new development we've seen in the CFL offensively? It just seems like Paul LaPolice is the only one to give something a shot and maybe try a flea flicker or a double reverse or anything goofy. Find any means necessary to get that first down and to get the ball into scoring position. And I think that is his whole mentality.
Yeah, I think realistically, obviously, Paul LaPolice is not going to win Coach of the Year, but it's an interesting discussion based on what he's been able to do with a lot of missing pieces. And if they stay in the hunt with Chris Drevler the rest of the way, I don't know. I mean, it's a stretch. It's probably never going to happen. I don't know if anyone really has the guts to name an offensive coordinator Coach of the Year, but his work is certainly worth some kind of recognition.
100%. And there's no coordinator of the year. I know college football has a coordinator of the year. The NFL doesn't even have a coordinator of the year, which is very interesting. That would be an interesting award. I don't know who would get that. Who would we name the coordinator of the year after? That I can't go that far back.
That feels like a Rob Van Stone question. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll leave that to him. Yeah,
he can figure that one. I don't think he actually listens to this podcast, but that's okay. Paul LaPolice probably wishes he could have had a guy like Jordan Williams-Lambert at his disposal, as he's back in Saskatchewan now after it was allegedly false news about a week ago. It just was a bit of delay, I guess, for whatever reason. Maybe we'll find out in the coming days as he arrives in Regina after a brief tenure with the Chicago Bears that, unfortunately, like a lot of CFLers down there, didn't work out.
So there was a lot of names.
Yeah.
Oh boy. For all the names that went up, there was only a handful that stayed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all know this. Like, there's always weird politics to play when it comes to building NFL rosters. Still, it's not just pure talent. I mean, you can't tell me that Alex Singleton isn't better than some of the linebackers currently on the Eagles, but...
Or it goes back to the whole Ben Heenan discussion that we've had, too.
Yeah.
We knew he knew he was better than everybody else, or than a lot of the offensive linemen. But yeah, when that 4th-round pick comes in and you're just a lowly free agent making $120,000 a year on the practice roster, you kind of know where your bread is buttered, and that's about where things are going to end.
Yeah, and that's kind of why, guys like Willie Jefferson have said, nah, I'm done trying. I'm good up here now.
Darrell Walker, too.
Yeah, Darrell Walker, and maybe Jordan Williams-Lambert now, because he didn't sign just for the rest of this year. He decided to commit to the Riders for next year as well. And I think that's an interesting development in this whole thing, because it could have been easy for Williams-Lambert to say, I'm just going to sign through the rest of this year and then kind of take my options from there. Or maybe, in my opinion, he's being smart by signing through next year, because we've seen a lot of guys come back from the NFL, especially receivers. And John and I talked about this a little bit last week. Weston Dressler came back from the NFL and didn't look that great for half a season. So could Jordan Williams-Lambert buck that trend? Maybe, maybe not. But he's smart maybe to be locked through next year, because the rest of this year is a bit of a wash in the grand scheme of things anyway. He gets a fresh start here next year, gets a whole year of film on him again, and then he looks at his options again.
And it's just not Weston Dressler. We saw it here with Andy Fantus when he came back. Mm-hmm. He had a rough time in those 6 games that he came back after testing the Chicago Bears waters. And Yeah, you know what? I think he could still make an impact. It's the same offense. Yes, it's a different quarterback, a better quarterback, but a different quarterback. And I don't. The big question is, where does he fit?
Mm-hmm.
Who, how? What are the dominoes that fall to see him in the inside as the inside receiver for the Saskatchewan Roughriders?
Yeah, and this might have to lead to a tough football decision, because it's not Shaq Evans, it's not Kyran Moore, it's not Naaman Roosevelt. So nope. You're looking at Manny Arsenault and Kenny Stafford, essentially. So,
and I take Williams-Lambert over both of them
absolutely. Now. Yeah. And I mean, you gave up an asset to get Stafford, whether that was just because you had to get something in return or not, I don't know. I mean, he's been the Rob Bagg Memorial healthy scratch every game since he's been here.
Yeah, and yeah, oh boy.
But you can't really do that to Arsenault the rest of the season. He's not quite. Arsenault is above Stafford in that level, where I don't know if you can justify just making him the healthy scratch every week. He's probably not going to be too happy about that.
Like, and he's just unless you can starting to come around too.
Yeah, unless he's got some kind of nick somewhere where you can stash him on the 6 game for a bit and make a decision.
Oh, I think that is going to be the most interesting part coming up over the next few weeks, especially offensively, is where he is going to fit in. If at all, maybe he's going to be the one placed on the 6 game. He'll be Graham Harold. He'll come in and not see the field. He just has that turf toe, hamstring.
I mean, it would be a good way to get back into CFL shape and to readjust to the CFL again. Just practice once a week when the doors are closed and no one can see you practicing. I mean, no, not that they ever do that. They certainly don't have 6 game players practicing during the closed practice.
Never happens.
No team. Not every team does that. No, not a chance.
No.
But if they can figure it out, if there is a way to get him into the lineup and he does perform, I do think that is game changing for this receiving core, because Manny Arsenault has been serviceable. He's made a couple of catches when he's had to, but it just gives them more explosive options down the field. As good as Manny Arsenault is now, he's probably more of a possession guy. There's always a chance that Naaman Roosevelt's going to get hurt at some point, because that's kind of been his history for the last while. Knock on wood, it doesn't happen, because it's felt like he's had another kind of breakout year after dealing with injuries for the last couple of years again. So if all of a sudden you have Jordan Williams-Lambert and Shaq Evans being able to make some deep plays, and you have Kyran Moore kind of being like Brandon Banks, being swerve and doing all those kinds of, ankle breaking kind of moves, that's a pretty dynamic trio that Cody Fajardo suddenly has to work with.
Yeah, and then Naaman Roosevelt, that second down, make the 8-yard catch, sit down, and that really gets the Rider offense over the top, and maybe it'll stretch out that defense and give the room for William Powell again to start finding his way through the offensive line and that sort of thing. And it would be nice to see the offensive line also start to step up, take that next step. They took a great first step over the first 6 to 8 games of the year, a little bit of a slide, but it'd be nice to see them take that next step for that young unit too.
Yeah, it feels like some of the defensive coordinators are starting to figure out that O-line a little bit. Like, they were a young group that performed pretty well, notably against some weaker teams. But all things considered, still, it's pretty hard to be too down on the group, considering they've been without Brendan Labatt for the entire season, and usually when he goes down, the line just goes down with it. So, in the big picture, they've been pretty good, and Brendan Labatt was spotted at practice today. I saw the picture from Derek Taylor that he was hanging around a little bit, so maybe there's a positive sign there to at the very least, get him around the team again and maybe helping out a little bit.
And give him that luxury of another Canadian in the lineup, and having the good Canadians this year has given them the luxury to allow a Jordan Williams-Lambert, another solid American, to come into the lineup, because guys like Cam Judge and Dakota Shepley and Darius Bladdock and Dan Clark, all the Mike Edom, they've all been really good. And it's, even
McInnes, one of the things I was secretly a little worried about was when Corey Watson went down with his injury, and I know we all kind of rolled our eyes at the Riders signing Corey Watson at the start of the season. And he's put up kind of the yards you'd expect from him based on his career numbers, but a lot of the little things he does well. And especially like blocking and all that sort of thing. And then I remember I was like, oh boy, are they going to miss that? Is McInnes ready for, that kind of role? And then he threw a pretty good block in Labor Day, and I was like, okay, he's maybe not Corey Watson yet, but there wasn't the significant drop up that I was expecting that maybe could have hurt the offense a little bit.
And that's the great luxury. Yeah, Justin McInnes and hopefully Braden Lennius can start picking it up, maybe put on some pounds and play that tight end role that the Riders were missing with Patrick Lavoie out. Mm-hmm. It's just it's a luxury right now that the Riders have not had in a long time, is having a good, strong core of Canadians to allow themselves the options to pick up some Americans that can fill out the lineup.
Yeah, this is probably the best the Canadian depth has been since 2013, I would say.
Easy. And
it's certainly not at that level. There isn't like 11 guys on this roster that I say could start, but it's not one Canadian goes down and you're hooped, at least. Like it's gone up a little bit.
It's gone up a lot, and even those guys who can't start are starting to develop. Like it took Cam Judge a couple of years to turn into having this great season that he's having right now. And you talk about guys who had a tough game at the Banjo Bowl. Cam Judge did, but he has been solid at linebacker. And then how many other Canadian linebackers have there been in that Rider secondary right now? Micah Tights and all those guys. I mean, it'd be interesting.
They've gone through Sam Hurl twice. Like, come on.
It's true. Or Sam.
Yeah, great guy, great special teamer, but just was never really. And we've he's kind of the unofficial punching bag of this podcast. Is Sam Hurl. We've talked about him probably more than we should.
And he is a fantastic team guy. And
absolutely.
It's easy to be the Canadians are easy to be punching bags.
Yeah, and so, but ultimately, yeah, Jordan Williams-Lambert should, in theory, boost this offense. At the very least, it can't make it worse. The question is how it's going to fit. Now, what we know is where the CFL is going to fit potentially for the next 8 years, as it's been reported by Dan Barnes of Post Media that the CFL and TSN have agreed to a 6-year extension, which I guess really shouldn't be super surprising. The CFL was never going to leave TSN. I think that's pretty obvious at this point in their relationship. It would take something monumental for the CFL to no longer be on TSN in every capacity. But what's interesting is the deal wasn't up until 2021. And last time I looked at my calendar, it's still 2019. Why are we signing this deal so dang early?
It would be interesting to see who instigated this. Mm-hmm. If it was the league approaching TSN or TSN approaching the CFL. And I know you got a few details. What were some of the details?
It's a 6-year deal. I think money's up to about $50 million per, so that's about a $4 million bump. And they have full rights to everything, Grey Cup, digital, blah, blah, blah. We're both interested to see what they do with digital, obviously. And there's some ratings incentives. I'm not really sure which way those go or how that worked exactly, but that's basically all we know at this point.
Yeah, man, it would have been nice to see at least one game a week come off the TSN schedule, and especially if the CFL goes to 10 teams.
Yeah,
that's a pretty packed schedule, especially if hockey starts. Oh man.
Yeah, I just think that's. So, hypothetically speaking, and there's other reasons why I think this is not the greatest timing or the greatest decision by the CFL at this point in their business model, but we'll get there. So, if the league gets to 10 teams, that's on average 5 games a week, probably in a window most of the times between Thursday and Saturday, in a shrinking industry in this country. Like, this isn't the States where sports broadcasting is still a huge deal. This is a budget that keeps getting cut every year, and they're trying to do it with fewer people every year, and it's just, can they really pull off 5 games a week in like a 4-day window really well? I don't know. It just popped in my head, and this is what they're doing a lot on Sportsnet with the Western Hockey League broadcast and the QMJHL broadcast. Their whole CHL is the of Cosentino and crew. They don't go to half the games. They just do it from the studio. Mm-hmm. So it's just a very thin crew that goes into the rink and broadcast the game, where it's produced and switched out of Toronto right beside the broadcasters who are just watching it on a couple of screens. I just hope it doesn't get to that, especially how thin, is there enough
domed. Like, I just think of the whole production side of things, to do 5 games a week, to pull up the sticks and go. And if there's an NHL game in Montreal and a NHL game in Vancouver, but the CFL games are in Calgary, Saskatchewan, and Montreal, you're just kind of be like, what? I just don't know what's going to happen. It's just very interesting.
Yeah, it seems on that end is, but well, that's something that TSN will obviously have to figure out, and I assume they would have a plan for that, because obviously it seems like everything's going ahead somewhat in Atlantic Canada, and we should expect something there soon at some point, you would think, and this is what the league wants. But to me, on the other end of it is, okay, yes, TSN and the CFL, you guys have had great relationship for how many years? It's, you helped the league through some tough times. They revolutionized kind of the way football is broadcasted in this country at one point compared to what was going on in the CBC at the time. And I don't know, it feels, and all that's fair, and I get why you kind of want to stick with the horse that brought you and all that, but at the same time, you don't know what was out there. And if you're a business, at the end of the day, this is supposed to be a business. Even if you wait a year and maybe that ratchets it up the pressure on TSN a little bit and you squeeze a few more bucks out of them, or maybe there's actually some offers out there that are fairly decent from some competitors where you can maybe grow your TV revenue, because every other league in the world except the ones that are essentially Canadian, I'm including the NHL in this, do that.
And you can't improve your broadcast without competition.
Exactly. That as well.
And it's multifold, all of that. And you talked about the TSN didn't improve the game by miles, but the thing is, it's been stagnant for the last 5 years. It's been the same graphics package. It's been the same studio look. It's been the same everything. And
they've tried like the live mics and the ref cams, but that's stuff that's already been there, and that's nothing really that new.
No, but I mean, like, just even change the look a little bit. It's the same bug. It's the same. I don't know.
The same angles, the same everything.
Yeah.
How many times? Like, I mean, you and I both noticed it. It was the Thursday night kickoff game in the NFL where all of a sudden NBC was using this weird. It appeared they were using in spots a cable cam along the sideline for their main shot, and I was like, "Whoa, this is different." And you notice that every year in the NFL, especially between like NBC, I notice especially really likes to try different things like every season, it seems.
I think, TSN's taking more of the CBS approach and just simple, steady, and maybe the game of the week will have all the whiz-bang packages, but then even look at ESPN's package. They change things every year. They change things within a game. They went from the neon 1st and 10 to the black 1st and 10 within the span of one game.
Yeah.
It doesn't make the CFL very nimble, being pegged in for another 8 years. And then the next part about it is, I don't know what the digital rights are, but I know there's some great digital departments in the CFL that would love to have the access to instantly put a highlight on their social media feeds. And you don't see that unless TSN allows them to replay that touchdown. Yeah. So the play, the Brett Lothar field goal, I know there's some great digital guys on the field for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. They would have that highlight ready and up within 10 minutes, but they can't, because the TSN outright owns every piece of video, and they would be forced to take it down right away, and that really doesn't grow the game that much. No,
and you see it in other sports. There are, the NHL, kind of the NFL, the NBA. These are leagues that have kind of allowed their teams to do this sort of thing, and they have. I believe the NHL, I'm not 100% sure, I don't really follow hockey that closely anymore, but just you've seen, especially, I know the NBA especially has really gone all in on that, and they allow anyone and everyone to do whatever with their feeds and on social media, at least in terms of showing clips here or there and all that, and you see that all the time. There's one, I think baseball is really bad for also not allowing it, and it's funny that these games that are kind of not growing are these leagues that kind of aren't getting that on social media.
And how do you get to the next generation of football fans? And that's the only way you can do it. And I can't remember what the Instagram feed is it was all just basketball highlights, and it has millions of followers just because the guy would post great basketball highlights, and that was the whole.
Well, what's the one we follow, like the college football elite or whatever it's called, right?
Yeah, and it's just instantly college football highlights over. Like, it just, and even the team sites, it doesn't matter if it's Oklahoma, Clemson, or Oregon State, within 10 minutes, that great play is on every social media platform they own. The NFL, the Raider game last night, the first touchdown from Derek Carr to Williams was on their Instagram feed in 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it was awesome from some different low angle that their digital team had, and they had that thing up in an instant. And the shares and the love that they get for that it's priceless. And the CFL let it up for a few bucks.
Yeah, and in the CFL, you might get a video on the the next day or something from a feed.
Yeah,
and
ICYMI.
And it's all the feeds you saw on TV anyway. There's nothing really all that interesting in it.
No, and every team has their own camera guy in the field. And I know the Riders have that big Maxtron system with tons of great highlights too. And it just the opportunities there.
The guy who runs that thing, though, jeez.
I know.
Whoever does all the replays, God.
Sorry. But yeah, there's such a great opportunity and some great digital producers in all the CFL that would do such an amazing job if they had the access to it, or they have the access to it but are allowed to do it.
Yeah, and it's these little things that we've noticed with the CFL over the years, and how they keep, to use a Chris Jonesism, stub their toe and prevent them from really taking that next step. And I think all of these little things too, if all of a sudden the CFL, I mean, obviously all the social media stuff, but if they're on more than just TSN and they got great presentation and they have all these things working together for a change, it would help sort of the image of the league towards people who don't like the league either, right? The people who come out and say, well, the CFL is Bush. And I mean, if you watch some of the broadcasts, it doesn't feel like a professional football league at times. Like you're watching a game and it's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with what the CFL on TSN is doing, but it just doesn't quite feel big league, even though we know it's professional big league football.
It just sometimes feels more like a routine instead of a big event. There's only 4 games a week. There's only 3 games this week. Every game should be the biggest event there is. And I don't really think they treat it as such.
No, and hopefully we can find out what some of these ratings incentives are, and maybe it goes the other way a little bit, where the CFL has recognized that a little bit and said, okay, if you get your ratings up, we can help you with this, or that. And, maybe that helps push them a little bit without having to bring in a competitor, right? Maybe.
Yeah. And let's hope it does. Maybe there's other, what was some of those weird NHL Sportsnet incentives, or not even incentives, that they had to do as a part of the $1 billion contract. They had to do certain things that were in the contract.
I didn't look at that contract that closely. I don't know.
Right. But yeah, that was one of the big problems, is a lot of this. Yes, the contract cost billions of dollars for the Canadian rights, but there was also millions involved in a lot of the things they had to do and what was involved in that contract to execute those games. And maybe some of that verbiage is in this contract. And let's hope for the CFL and for TSN too, push them a little bit. I don't think they've been pushed at all in this process. No,
they haven't really been, because it's been an easy, comfortable ride for them for the most part. Regular season games average 300,000 to 600,000 people, which, while not mind-blowing numbers, is pretty good for TV on a regular basis. They get upwards, they've seemingly stopped talking a lot about ratings, which I guess they figured out no one really cares. But, you would regularly get around 1 million for most, a couple of Labor Day games, and around the playoffs, and Grey Cup hovers between 3 and 4 million, and it's an exclusive property that you can sell to the TV service providers for carriage fees and all that sort of stuff. So it's not like they're not making money off it, and it comes off at a pretty good price for them overall compared to paying billions of dollars for other products. So I get all that. So maybe they've just been too comfortable, and the CFL is maybe waking them up a little bit without really pushing them too hard.
Well, it's going to be a big 8 years for them then. It's a put up or shut up time, I guess.
Yeah, it's going to be a big 8 years for the league too, because the game, if they get to 10 teams and where it goes from there, and really what the broadcasting landscape is going to look like in 8 years, I think the question is really, did they get the digital part right?
I don't know. I and that's the whole thing that bugs me about TSN. I would love to pull the plug and just have TSN streaming, but what is it, like $17 a month?
I thought it was higher than that even.
Yeah, something atrocious like that. And that hopefully is something that they're going to address as well. I don't see it happening anytime soon because it always seems like Canada is about 10 years behind the rest of the United States when it comes to things like this. Maybe they can buck the trend. I don't know. The CRTC is such a monolith when it comes to things like this. I don't know. And the whole streaming thing, it would be nice to have a nice streaming platform. That was I know your kind of dark horse was Shaw on this whole thing. My dark horse was DAZN. I was hoping maybe they could come up with some sort of package too.
Yeah, for me, like, there's been a lot of people talk about Sportsnet, obviously, because they are like the main sports competitor to TSN in this country. But based on the fact that the amount of money they've let go in hockey, and they've cut the Blue Jays budget significantly lately, makes you think they're not exactly too keen on spending money, even if they're stealing a product from their competitor at this point. So I always kind of felt, well, yeah, as we talked about, maybe Shaw, but yeah, DAZN would have been great, and I thought it could have been an opportunity for the CFL maybe to, TSN, you have all these rights, and you can still stream on your platforms as well, but we're going to sell some streaming rights to DAZN as well, or to whatever streaming service, because we need to reach these people too, and not just be, not just people who can stream on TSN Go because they already have a cable subscription, and probably, I don't even know how many people are willing to pay like $25 a month for TSN. I believe it's like $25 a month for Sportsnet as well. All of a sudden you're paying $50 a month for like 2 channels. No thanks.
No thank you. Yeah, hard pass. And it's I don't think they really looked into the crystal ball on this one, because 8 years and the way things have changed in the last 10, that's a long time, man. It just sort of settling in how long 8 years is. I'll be in my 50s. That is a long time.
Yeah, and you'll have probably gone through another handful of employers between now and then.
Yep. Or stations will close, and I've shut a few down too, so I'm the harbinger of death, I guess.